So I'm excited today to be here with Dr. Michael Boring, who is a friend of our community and actually a friend of mine in the neighborhood, he and his wife and children. We live in the Coronado neighborhood. Michael is wearing several hats today as far as what he's going to share. Michael is a philosophy professor, also Buddhist, and also a father with children at home. And so we thought maybe for this segment we would just open up and allow Michael to share a little bit about what it's like to be a parent at home now. His wife is working from home, he's working from home, the kids are at home, and what that looks like from his family household, and maybe some of the challenges, but maybe some of the solutions they've found, if they've found any solutions yet after about a week and a half, I guess, of being cloistered, right?
Yes.
So welcome, Michael. We're glad to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. My most important job right now is as the father of 3 children, 9, 11, and 14, who are used to going to school every day, but now have to learn at home. We have a slight advantage in that we used to homeschool our kids, so we've done a lot of this before. But in the about 2 or 3 years since we stopped homeschooling, we've gotten to see the value of public education and a more structured environment. So luckily, our school has sent out a great deal of resources. They've set up pages for each grade to work with, and that's been quite helpful. And they're reliable resources, Khan Academy and a few others along those lines.
The public schools?
The public schools.
Okay, great.
Well, they attend Khalsa Montessori right up the street, up on 3rd.
Okay.
So it's a charter school. It is, still quite a challenge to keep them on task and to keep them doing things that are consistent with what the other students in the classroom are doing, which I think is really important.
Yeah.
It would be one thing for me to say, okay, I'm going to develop your curriculum and we're going to push in this direction. And then when school reconvenes, they'd be on completely different pages. They've taken that extra step to make sure that we're all working on that all the students are working on the same task, which has been really helpful. I'm grateful to that, that they've taken this quite seriously. Some of the challenges, my wife and I are both working from home, and so we're both working remotely, and the kids are also working from home. Our homeschooling is a little bit more us working together,
Right.
as opposed to me leading them. So each day we set up a table out in our backyard, and the 3 kids and myself will do our work. And my job is mostly to see what their teachers want and get them on task and keeping them on task. The other challenge, of course, is this is all online, and we are fortunate that both my job and my wife's job provide us with laptop computers.
Right.
And we have our own personal laptop computer at home. But that means there's one computer for 3 kids. And so learning how to schedule it. And we get on a 1 hour per child rotation for them to do whatever online assignments there are. And then on the 2 hours that they're not there, they have reading that they can do, or they can do what they were doing in the online project, but just not with the online component. Some of the, I guess, personal challenges of doing this from home with the children is, honestly, it's the feeling of being cooped up.
Yeah.
And then seeing that these are the only 4 people that I'm really interacting with. They're the most important people in my life, but there are also other people in my life that I miss.
Right.
I miss my friends, I miss my students, I miss my colleagues at the college. And I've come to realize over the last few days just how important they are. And that
kind of for mental stimulation, emotional stimulation, and just relationships,
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. I really...
To feel a part.
Exactly. I care for these people in a different way. I'm concerned about my college, the health of my college. I'm concerned about engaging with my students, making sure that they are on task, but without face-to-face interaction with them. It makes it a little bit more challenging.
Right.
And then, of course, very limited contact with the friends that I've developed. Our Coronado neighborhood is a rather tight-knit neighborhood, and we're definitely active in that neighborhood. And so we've had to adjust our activity. One of the advantages, people like to complain about things like Facebook and Twitter and things like that, but in a time like this, I think that we're actually quite fortunate that we have social networks, social technology to keep us connected. Now, of course, it's not the same, but it helps us out. It stops that deep sense of isolation that would come otherwise.
Yeah, it seems that in at least for me, in the past, I was thinking that our social media, Facebook, Twitter, all of that was separating us and isolating us. And now I think it's bringing us together, right? It's being used as a positive tool.
Absolutely.
And so I'm wondering if this is also a transformative time for us in learning how to use those tools in really life-giving, more positive ways, because they really became pretty challenging, I think, in the era of Trump, right? People were beating each other up and saying some pretty nasty stuff to each other and using some pretty awful language. And so now really, I think we're seeing that it's being used to support and care and love for each other. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing what you shared about family, because I think maybe that will be helpful for some of our viewers who are probably dealing with the same situation. And I think you're right. Our social circle, in many ways, at least our face-to-face circle, is now limited to those that are in our household. Yeah. But for those that are living alone, that may be, even more challenging.
I think about that a lot. I think about, for example, when I lived in New York City and lived in a small apartment, the isolation that would come from something like that would be almost too much to bear.
Right. Well, and right now it sounds like New York is kind of becoming the epicenter, right, for the pandemic. So, well, I want to ask you too, from your perspective as somebody whose worldview is Buddhist, and I know you've come to our liberation theology events, and I think your insights have been really, really, really helpful, because I think in many ways my understanding probably of Jesus is that Jesus grew up Middle Eastern and was probably more Buddhist than I think we've kind of turned Jesus into this Western Christian philosopher, when in essence I think Jesus was much more Middle Eastern and Buddhist. Mm-hmm. So how does your Buddhist worldview inform you in kind of our current, what we might call a crisis, right, or pandemic, our health and social crisis that we're having?
One of the fundamental principles of Buddhism, and there are plenty, and I'm going to just pick one of them that's relevant here, is impermanence.
Yeah.
Everything is in a constant state of change. Nothing exists at all as a permanent entity. Our response to that is really very determinative of our spiritual life. If I refuse to accept the reality of impermanence, then I'm going to experience suffering. If I accept it, the suffering lessens to a certain degree. And suffering in the Buddhist sense is it's different from, say, a modern conception of suffering. We think of suffering as someone who is, for example, right now, suffering with the COVID virus. They are having difficulty breathing, they are afraid for their lives, they are in great deal of physical pain. Suffering in the Buddhist sense is the term is dukkha. The Pali term is dukkha. And that term possibly more literally translates as being out of joint, being dislocated. The same term could be used for a wheel that's off its axle, or a table where a leg is loose. It still functions, but it's not quite right. I think of a really good modern example. If your car's alignment is off, I can still drive down the freeway, but it's difficult to maneuver, and it's causing more damage to the car.
Right.
Likewise with us, when our center is on something external to us in a material sense, or in any sense that feeds our ego or gets us attached to some aspect of the world, that's feeding that suffering. And what makes that challenging in our culture is we have so much to distract us. We have so much to put our attention on. And admittedly, they're nice things, they're fun things. But as we get attached to them, we pull farther and farther away from ourselves, from our spiritual life. And I think that the message of Buddha matches up very nicely with the message of Jesus at this point, which is, if we're either building treasures on the earth or we're building treasures in heaven, whatever that might be. For me, spiritual fulfillment is a release from the suffering that is to a great extent self-imposed through my attachments.
Right.
And so one of the possibilities of this situation, as challenging as it is how can we take this and use it ultimately to our spiritual advantage? And anything that's a spiritual advantage is always difficult, is always challenging. As I tell my kids all the time, getting them to work through a more challenging problem. Nothing that is worthwhile is easy. They might be fun, they might be entertaining, but ultimately, they're not worthwhile. I'm not going to have fond memories in old age about watching a fancy Avengers movie or something like that. It's going to be, what did I do? I worked hard to overcome certain challenges to get my PhD. I worked hard to keep my marriage strong through those difficult periods. I worked hard to develop a relationship with my kids. Those are all very challenging things, but they're all worthwhile. This is, without getting too mystical, this is a lesson presented to us from the universe to turn inward, to examine ourselves, and to confront those escapes that we use. I use those escapes. And I have to be honest, I have not been a model Buddhist through this. It's been frustrating. It's been, I had this realization last night as I was getting ready to fall asleep that I've been a bit of a petulant child through this. I've been grumpy. I've been grumpy with my kids. I've been grumpy with my dogs. I've been nice with my wife, but I'm like, very often I'm saying, I just need some space. I just need some space. Yeah. And then I was lying in bed, and I'm like, wow, you're not accepting this change that's coming over us. You're not accepting the challenge that COVID is presenting to you. You're not accepting the opportunity for growth that this is presenting to you. Yeah. And so I've had to adjust. And it's going to be a process. But it is. It's a real opportunity for us to shift.
Yeah, well, of course, I've been a perfect Christian through all of this, right? A perfect progressive Christian, yeah.
I've seen the light shining from your house. It keeps us up at night.
Hardly at all, but I think you're right. I find that interesting. You talk about detachment and Jesus as a rabbi talks much about don't love things of the world. What you store up on earth, the moth and rust destroys it. Store up for yourselves treasures that are beyond things of the earth, and he lived a life where he was really detached, pert near from everything, and I think that's a really good message. And how do we live into this place of suffering, and how does it not only change us, but how does it transform us? Because our theme for Lent this year has been transform people. And going beyond change and going into transformation, because once you're transformed, you don't ever go back. I think of the cocoon, and I think of the butterfly, and the caterpillar, and the butterfly never goes back into a caterpillar and back into the cocoon. So how do we find ways? Isn't it interesting that you said, in the middle of the night or where you're lying in bed, those are sometimes those moments we have, those awakenings, those moments where the light comes and we're like, oh, there's a different way to be. One last question I'd like to ask you. So you are a philosopher. What are your thoughts from a philosophical perspective? And I think we're all really attempting to understand and to put a narrative around the questions you've posed about how is this going to change us? How is this going to transform us? What are the lessons we're learning in the middle of COVID-19? So from a philosophical or philosophy perspective, what would you say, Michael?
There are a couple philosophers that I've been turning to, very distant in time. The first being Socrates, not the first Western philosopher, but certainly the one who changed the game.
Yeah, right.
And of the many lessons that he taught us, one was when we get too comfortable, we become complacent. We stop growing. He saw this in his own city of Athens. He saw them becoming complacent. They were once a great society. They were the epicenter of the world. But through their, in a sense, resting on their laurels, they allowed their society to ultimately lose that position.
Yeah.
Socrates saw this, and out of his patriotism, he stirred things up. He was the gadfly. He was the one that made people stop and reflect on what are we doing here? What are we really doing here? To a certain degree, COVID-19 is that gadfly. It's disrupting us. It is telling us, you need to wake up. You need to shift. The other person I very frequently turn to, he's like that ghost that keeps haunting me, I can't get away from him, is SØREN Kierkegaard, the Christian existentialist from the 19th century. There is a passage in one of his books where he discusses what is he going to do with his life. And he says, well, I have to do something. And whatever I do needs to be something that is of benefit to people. Now, I'm not someone who can make things easier. I'm a philosophy professor. I am not someone who's going to develop the next iPhone app that's going to revolutionize your life.
Right.
I'm not going to solve, somebody hopefully will solve the ecological crisis. It's not going to be me. My job is not to make things easier, but rather my job with compassion is to make things more difficult for people. COVID-19 is making things more difficult for us. And when things are made more difficult for us, well, we have two options. We can either crumble or we can grow. And to quote one more philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, what does not kill me makes me stronger. And that is a very real life situation that we're living in right now. I think Nietzsche's words, ironically, as one of our teachers, along with Christ and Buddha and Kierkegaard, has a lot to teach us. There is this challenge of growing through this, and that growth is not may not be anything that we exhibit materially. Our economy may never fully recover from this, but we, as a community, as a people, we really could possibly recover from this and be something stronger.
Yeah.
Maybe not as wealthy, but stronger. I'd rather be more compassionate, healthier, stronger than wealthy any day.
Yeah. Wow, those are some great closing words, and I think that is, it fascinates me that you say, you're here to really make people think, right? To help people to live into the challenges and not necessarily to make people feel comfortable as a philosopher. And I say those words to people of the Christian faith, and they balk at that and say, no, you're here to comfort us. And I'm like,
I'm sorry.
Not so much. Here to challenge us, right? And push us forward. So I really appreciate those words, and I'm hoping that, I'm absolutely confident that people that are hearing those words are going to find those really valuable, and really useful as we come together to try to be our better selves, and to grow into our better selves and to become more humane and more compassionate and more full of mercy during this time of COVID. It hopefully will take us beyond, right? And like you said, our bank accounts and our wealth may be less, but I think that internal spiritual wealth is going to be much richer and more beautiful.
Absolutely.
So, thank you, Michael.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Peace. And everybody out there, we ask you blessings upon your day. Stay safe, and just stay connected. Peace.